F is for Family is the best, worst adult cartoon I've ever seen. I'm aware those are two very conflicting adjectives, but it really is the best way I can describe my feelings towards this show, because it does so much stuff I don't like. In any other case, I would absolutely loathe F is for Family. But somehow, I think it's one of the greatest and most underappreciated adult sitcoms I've ever watched. Just how is that? Well, we got a bit of time to go over it, haven't we? F is for Family released back at the end of 2015, and very recently at the end of 2021 aired its 5th and final season on Netflix. And for the longest time, I did not want to give this series a chance. I mean, just look at it. I think most had the initial impression that this was just gonna be your standard run-of-the-mill Family Guy clone that comes out and is forgotten about in like a week. But I watched through the whole thing when the 4th season was out and kinda fell in love with it. I thought it was amazing. I know, I like stuff sometimes, it's crazy. But they somehow created a show that was miserable and depressing and uncomfortable, and I love it. Maybe that says more about me than anything. One of the biggest red flags I had when going in was that it was created by Bill Burr. Now, I have nothing against the guy. I don't think I've seen a single thing he's in other than Breaking Bad and the awful H3 podcast interview. But there seems to be a trend where a comedian comes along, wants to make an adult cartoon, craps out the worst thing imaginable, probably under the assumption that making an animated cartoon was easy, and screws off onto the next project after it's cancelled in 4 episodes. We've got junk like Alan Gregory created by Jonah Hill, where he basically just took Stewie Griffin, tried to make him more of a smarmy intellectual, and called it a day, being dropped only 7 episodes in. Or on the other side of the spectrum, we've got something like Big Mouth by Nick Kroll, which undoubtedly is beloved by a large group of people and has been an immense success for Netflix. However, it certainly doesn't have the best reputation online. F is for Family, on the other hand, kinda just came and went without much fanfare, receiving generally positive reviews across the board, however, never once managed to reach the same level of popularity as its peers. Why is that? Again, to reiterate, upon watching it, under what appears to be your average lowbrow Family Guy knockoff, became what is without a doubt one of my favorite shows out there, showing a harshly realistic view on an average American family in the 70s, particularly with the stigma around masculinity and the effects that can have on one's mental health, especially during a time period where expressing that was extremely taboo. But even further than that, you can tell this was a project incredibly near and dear to Bill Burr, him having a part in much more than just the creation of it, writing many of the best episodes up until the finale, having help from plenty of acclaimed folks along the way, such as writers from The Simpsons' golden era. Although, spiting all that positivity, however, F is for Family is also one of the ugliest, most unfunny cartoons I think I've ever seen, doing a lot of stuff that I really don't care for and would make me hate any other show for doing the exact same thing. But I think it's certainly a case where I can understand why it's there, and the good definitely outweighs the bad. So without further ado, let's get right into F is for Family season by season, just to truly see what makes it the best worst adult cartoon ever. F is for Family stars Frank Murphy. On the outside, he's your average man in the 70s, works a pretty standard job at the airport, coming back every night to his stay-at-home wife Sue, eldest teen son Kevin, adolescent Bill, and his youngest kid Maureen. Guess which one is meant to be Bill Burr? The first scene perfectly encapsulates what the whole show is about. It's after work and the family are all sitting at the dinner table trying to enjoy their supper together, Frank trying to keep up this perfect, happy family image, almost for himself in a way, while the phone keeps ringing over and over again, not letting him be in this perfect world without the constant looming of life and responsibilities keeping him in check. His rage building up more and more to the point where he screams at the kid on the phone and leaves to punch a boxing bag in his garage, yelling at another kid in the process. From just this, you know exactly what kind of guy Frank Murphy is. He's someone who cares deeply about the family he's built, but never truly gets to enjoy that because of the lack of control he really has over his own life. He knows he's a slave to the 9-to-5 system and there's nothing he can do to get out of it, having given up his own dreams to start a family because that's what he was expected to do as a man. The intro encapsulates this wonderfully, like the actual intro with the theme song and everything, showing a young and optimistic Frank graduating college and soaring high into the sky, but reality sets in. He's drafted, gets his wife pregnant, gets fat and bald, and quickly plummets to the ground where he remains dormant in a chair surrounded by his family. It perfectly shows how fast everything can move and how overwhelming it is having everything pile on at once, him barely being able to get by. It's a great reflection of the series as a whole because, oh boy, is this shit depressing. Each season has the Murphy family members all going through their own little arcs, building around one theme: but the first season goes for something much more broad with all of them, which I think was a smart move on the writer's part. It's not really one of those shows where you can watch one episode and get what exactly it is they're going for, so if you were ever interested in checking it out, I'd recommend watching all of season 1 before gathering a solid opinion. Helps that by far it's the shortest season at only 6 episodes. But because of this, it gives you the most basic overview of these characters and what you can expect from them. They have a pretty clear trend. Life sucks. Let's start with Maureen because she's without a doubt the least interesting member of the Murphy family and not one I care to focus on too much. She's the youngest in the family and doesn't really go through much development in the first season, and I gotta say she's the only one of them who I actively dislike. Ironically, I talked about it in my previous video, but I've never really been a fan of the bratty little girl stereotype who's just annoying to the other characters, and we're meant to gawk and awe because it's cute or whatever. It's not that bad with her. It's done more realistically than many other examples I could name, but on her own she doesn't really have much going on. She's mainly just used as a foil for other characters such as Bill, who's much more interesting thankfully, clearly being the stand-in for a young Bill Burr, although it's not made too obvious. You know, unlike Big Mouth that doesn't come off like one big vent piece. They build onto this idea that Bill is kind of a pushover. He gets bullied at school, his only friend is the one neighborhood kid less cool than him, and he's constantly undermined by his father, wanting his respect. The theme with Bill is a loss of innocence, which I always enjoy, but because the entire show doesn't revolve around him, it doesn't lean all that much into it being a coming-of-age story, which I usually love, but here I don't mind, because each member of the family represents a different age group and therefore all get their own time to shine. Bill is just meant to be their excuse to tell stories with an adolescent boy. There are these great moments I love where Bill's childlike view of the world is broken again and again, followed by prolonged sequences of him looking distraught. Like when he catches his brother jerking off or winds up in his parents' room while they're frickin', even hearing his own dad insult him behind his back. You know what this reminds me of? The scene from Rick and Morty, where Morty has just had his entire perception of the world shaken, and now has changed because of that. Although F is for Family does it in a much more natural way. Throughout the series, Bill and Morty go through very similar character shifts, starting as a bit of a pussy and because of events surrounding them become more hard and cynical over time. However, with Bill it's many events piling onto each other and the change isn't immediate. Rick and Morty had the issue where because Morty had this shift so early into the series, we've now been stuck with a version of him so drastically different than his original personality, to the point of feeling like an entirely different character. And not helping is that the show is looking to go on for many, many more years, so the version of him in season 1 is going to seem so bizarre compared to how he acts for the rest of the series. Okay, that issue is going to be made a lot worse pretty soon. However, with Bill, not only does it work that F is for Family is a limited run, meaning they only had to work with him for 5 seasons and not indefinitely, but as we're going to see, they also do something different with him every time. He's not just cynical and that's that. They use it to tell stories that revolve around that change, with season 1 ending on him pushing his luck and winds up burning down the whole neighborhood forest. There's a payoff that feels natural to what they're building up to. I like Bill a lot, but he's nowhere near my favorite Murphy. Sadly, neither is Kevin, the eldest. Now, I don't not like him, but in season 1 he really doesn't have that much to do. But as we go on, you'll see they start to focus on him more and more and actually give him stuff to do which improves him a bunch. But here he's just used as a lightning rod for most of Frank's anger, as he's quite literally the exact opposite of what Frank looks for in his son. Being a slacker kid with no real aspirations other than becoming a successful musician, something Frank deems worthless so that he's just wasting his time. Sue and Frank are where things start to get interesting for me, as they're easily one of the most realistic depictions of a married couple I've ever seen in a cartoon. The trope here is nothing new. The aggravated working man who just wants to enjoy his peace and quiet when he's home from work, but can't due to his righty kids and nagging wife. But right off the bat throughout season 1, they make it apparent that there is so much more to them than that. Starting with Sue, that is all she's presented as initially. The stay-at-home mom who has a part-time job selling plastic Tupperware, which like Kevin is constantly undermined by Frank.
So, while mommy's busy with the little hobby...
It's a job!
Yes, fine, a job.
Throughout the first episode, it's treated as your fairly standard sitcom setup. But during the second episode, after she's finished all of her wifely duties for the day, you get this. She's miserable. Her life has no real purpose and she's aware of it. She wants to achieve something greater but knows that her responsibilities as a mother don't allow her to do that. She's expected to just be the stay-at-home housewife. The series greatly plays with these tropes. In any other standard adult sitcom, these would be all the characters are. It would be where every source of conflict arises from. But in F is for Family, we see them actively try to change the roles they've been given, Sue eventually getting a full-time job later in the season. The prime example of this, though, can be seen with our protagonist, Frank Murphy. He's deceptively simple at the beginning. You think he's just gonna be the angry dad stand-in. Every episode will be about something making him angry, and it'll be funny. But it's not. It's really sad. If there's one thing I can certainly compliment the show on, it's that the arguments are so genuine and real to the point of being uncomfortable at times. Frank and Sue are constantly at each other's throats, screaming at each other, calling each other all the names under the sun, but even then, they tend to end on some kind of positive note. Whether it be them realizing that no matter what, they'll always love each other and will be in each other's corners, or feeling bad for what happened and eventually trying to make it better. It's a depressing series to watch, but that doesn't come from the characters being assholes to each other, like I could say about so many other shows like Family Guy. It's depressing because you can see the actual human struggle in it. All these characters who want different things that clash with each other. And you're seeing them realize just how many hurdles they have to jump through just to be content with their lives. You soon realize that Frank isn't just your stuffy workaholic dad archetype. He's a miserable man who is not happy with his life. Near the end of the season, we get a brief glimpse at something that will be explored in later seasons. Having Frank talk to his son about how when he was younger he was going to be a pilot, even getting accepted into school, but had to give up on it upon getting his girlfriend pregnant. It's treated fairly inconsequentially here, but you soon realize that this is where the source of a lot of his anger comes from. Frank dropped everything in his life to do what he felt he was expected to do, marry the girl he got pregnant and get a job to support his newfound family, naively thinking he could just put his goals on the back burner to pick them back up at a later point. But that's not how life works. No matter what, there's always something bringing him further and further away from the dream he was so close to achieving. And Frank spends so much time lamenting about that he can't appreciate what's in front of him. There's a great moment in the first season where Frank has to take care of the kids while Sue is out doing her work for the day, which he clearly cannot handle because to him, that's not his job. He works at the airport 5 to 6 times a week, and so childcare should be the woman's job. He then gets a call from his wife's boss offering her a full-time job, something she evidently wants and is pushing for. And without even telling her that she got the offer, he declines it, hoping she'd never even find out. He does these actions and makes choices that usually would make you despise any other character, but because it's made so clear how deceptively complicated his life is and how much his ideology runs on the stereotypical nuclear family, you can understand why he does this. He just wants things to go back to his version of normal. And of course he ends up paying the price when Sue finds out and abandons them, him having to apologize and her letting him know that's not good enough. That for once he actually needs to back up his words with actions. He can't just say he supports her trying to do something for herself, he has to mean it now too. Frank is a super complex character that can be summed up by the simple point that he hates change. He was raised believing the world to be a certain way, and so any deviation from that scares him. Again, the first season does an excellent job in giving you the most basic understanding of their dynamics. And as we'll soon see, each and every one of them will be built upon and explored deeper as the series goes on. I'm really glad upon watching it that the show does give so much focus onto Frank, given Bill clearly being the stand-in for Bill Burr when he was a kid. You'd expect him to be the star, but because the star is his dad, it adds a lot of new meaning to everything. Like at first we get to see all these scenes of Frank being furious and bombastic, like a short fuse always ready to burst. Probably how Bill Burr saw his actual father when he was a kid. But it's like the show is a reflection of Bill realizing that as he got older, there were a lot more understandable reasons for his dad being that way. Like it's him making a show dedicated to sympathizing for his father and realizing all the hardships he actually had to go through that Bill just never knew about. Bill Burr also hits it out of the park when it comes to voicing him. You can definitely tell he was recounting exact inflections from his dad when yelling as him. And the rest of them do a good job too, such as Justin Long as Kevin, aka Alvin from Alvin and the Chipmunks. And I also noticed that not only Debbie Derryberry, the voice of Jimmy Neutron, plays Maureen, but also like 90% of the side characters. Speaking of, they try really hard to introduce you to this world. Like they wanted their own mini Springfield here, where secondary characters can come in and out of the plot when they please to give their recurring jokes. Or consistent TV series they're always watching. Them doing that thing like The Simpsons or Family Guy where there's extended scenes of us watching the show they're watching, so they can comment on TV of the time. And personally, I didn't really give a shit about any of this stuff. There's not a single side character here I like other than his Ned Flanders, Vic, although that's probably just because he's voiced by Sam Rockwell. But they all mostly boil down to the same gags over and over again, and I think they try a little too hard at times to make you like them. Like if they shove them and their repeated jokes in your face long enough, you'll start to laugh too. Laugh I never did! Yeah, F is for Family is without a doubt one of the least consistently funny shows I've ever watched. And I'm not just talking about how many of the jokes are simply racism or misogyny. Honestly, I don't mind those too much because there's at least some sort of deeper meaning with them, given how they're used to comment on how different the times were back then. But it's a lot of gross out stuff and cursing, and I think I've just grown out of that kind of stuff over the years. But yeah, no, I watched this show for the family drama, not for its amazing humor or anything. What doesn't help is the visuals. The series looks terrible. The designs for most of the characters are good, even if some of the kids look a little weird. But the rigs definitely don't do it any favors, making everything look super rigid and slow. It ruins a lot of the pacing and jokes because the voice actors give such exaggerated performances, yet their faces a lot of the time don't reflect the delivery at all. There are very occasional times where they try to shake things up, like this moment where they replicated the old UPS style, which I enjoy a lot, but those are very few and far between. If you can get past how it looks, under the surface there's a really special series here that has so much potential with these characters, and with season 1 ending on such a depressing note, it leaves you in anticipation for what's to come. There's a big strike going on at the airport throughout season 1, Frank being stuck between helping his friends and helping his boss, and the finale gives another example of how this show tries to be much more realistic than so many other cartoons, not falling into the same happy endings. With Frank driving down to the airport on Christmas Eve and giving a big sappy speech on the news, bringing the two parties together. The CEO of the company finally coming to an agreement with the union and putting a stop to the strike. Everything ends on a perfect little sappy note, until Frank is then fired immediately after. I love this as it shows you'll never get that with the series. You'll never get that moment where things are peaceful and stress-free. You get rid of one problem and two more arise. So let's see what this loss brings to the family in season 2. Where season 1 sets up these characters, how they act, and what their wants are, season 2 actively delves into that, showing how trying to achieve these goals is a lot harder than it initially seemed, because of their pre-established roles in the family. This is reflected with the opening, which shows a flashback to when things still seemed like they were looking up in Frank's life. He just got back from fighting in the war and is considered a hero and training to become a pilot, before cutting to where he's at now. 3 weeks unemployed with his wife now pulling all the weight. Much of the season is focused on Frank having lost his job, which I think is really smart. It shows that, in a way, his job was an intrinsic part of him because he's a man. To him, having no job and not being able to provide for his family means that he may as well have been dead. This is never something he actively expresses to his wife, however, instead bottling his aggression up, which makes him further lash out at his family. He isn't being irrational either. People do treat him differently now that he doesn't have a job. He knows that people are talking about him behind his back, and when they do speak to him, they treat him like a lost puppy or like he's on suicide watch, which certainly doesn't help. This leads to some really sad, uncomfortable moments, where he's being such an asshole but you can't help but sympathize for him because it comes from pure desperation. Like there's this great part where he takes his family out to dinner and has a nice meal with them, before realizing that at this point he can't even afford to pay the bill. And instead of taking the handout that the waitress is offering him, he takes that as an insult and starts yelling at her in front of everyone. I love how headstrong his character is. He has such strong beliefs about the world and how it should work. His pride is so huge that he would never allow anyone to support his family other than him. No handouts no matter how much they really need it. But of course in his pursuit of that, it causes a cavalcade of other conflicts, mainly with his kids. Sue gets on Frank's ass about going to the unemployment office, as they're getting to their wits' end. With him dragging his feet through the mud, he does eventually wind up going, but backs out at the last second, because he doesn't want to see himself on the same level as everybody else there. He doesn't want to feel like he's leeching off his government. Around the same time, he has an interaction with Kevin, who's ditching school, where he tells his son that he has to be honest with his mom about it, that a real man never lies. And so despite Kevin being truthful and admitting that he skipped class, clearly taking what his dad said to heart, Frank immediately buckles under the idea of being demeaned by his wife and lies to her, saying that he was at the unemployment office all day, putting on such a show about it that it demands an apology from her. Discussing all this makes me shocked how they somehow didn't make Frank completely unlikable. And in those cases, I think the simple animation ends up working in its favor. It's not one of those moments where he lies and then is let off the hook and so now he's all happy and stuff. He gets what he wants, but throughout it all, has this basic sad look on his face, staring at his son as he now knows that he just lost all of his respect. That if a real man doesn't lie, then what does that make him? There's a similar thing going on with Bill, where Frank has become so preoccupied with all the other stuff going on in his life that he starts to neglect him, forgetting to take him to hockey practice, which was the one thing he was looking forward to. Even doing something his dad was proud of and getting a job to pay for the stick, showing that Frank is always willing to offer words of support when they're doing something he likes, but rarely ever backs it up by continuing to show an interest. One thing I love in season 2 is how everything constantly feeds into each other. It's not just, character acts this way because other characters said this. It's showing you how much of a hierarchy there truly is when it comes to these things. That there's always a reason for somebody doing something. Bill isn't just acting out because. It's from not getting enough attention at home from his mum and dad. But that too isn't just cuz. It's because Sue is going through her own issues at the minute, facing massive hardships at work with her employers being incredibly misogynistic towards her, belittling all her input, and Frank is so preoccupied dealing with the depression from losing his job and dealing with Kevin, but also from the new job he gets where he's paid much less and therefore has to work way more hours to make up for it, often being sleep deprived. No character just is. There's a reason for everything, and because of that, it helps you understand where they're coming from more when they take certain actions. The real meat of season 2, however, is the marriage between Frank and Sue, and how because of everything piling on like this, it's seeming to be on its last legs. Sue ends up getting a job at the plasterwork company to Frank's dismay, as it now means he has to stay at home and take care of the kids. But she immediately wants to quit because of how awful it is dealing with the customers. She realizes she was in over her head, and a job wasn't the answer to all of her problems like she thought it was.
You really think I could quit it?
Wait, you want to quit?
I know I wanted a job, but Frank, it's horrible.
However, because Frank ruins his chance of getting his job back at the airport, she has to get the job working up at corporate for a bunch of men who sexually harass and discriminate against her. Frank sees and realizes none of this because of their severe lack of communication, and only sees that she has a job and he doesn't, building up his own resentments, this time towards his wife. She has a spark of hope when she makes this big invention for the company, giving her some new outlet and purpose, which of course upsets Frank, as now he has to deal with her taking her time away from the family again, which reaches a breaking point where she has to spend some money on a prototype build, and realizes that Frank stole all the money she was saving up for a rainy day to get back some stock that was ruined on his shift. And so when she finds out about this, she sells a locket that he gave her years ago to pay for it. It's like symbolism or something, no freaking way. After they blow up at each other, he devises a plan to get rid of his replacement at the airport, and gleefully explains to Sue how all their problems are going to be over. Now that he's getting his job back, she can quit hers, and everything can go back to normal. He has such a simple way of viewing the situation at hand, not understanding how fundamental their marital issues are. And after she blows him off to focus on her work for a change, he realizes how unsupportive he's really been towards her. How much he's deviated from his younger self who was always ready and willing to. And so he agrees to go to the church's couple retreat with her. This is where we get probably my favorite moment of the season, possibly one of the best moments of the whole show. The culmination of all this pent-up rage. During this retreat, Sue constantly chastises Frank for never letting his guard down and being honest about what's bothering him, obviously thinking that only when he does that will he be able to work through their issues. She just wants to understand him, and so keeps pushing him until he lets out this speech.
I lost my job, and how did you support me?
I got a job to feed the whole goddamn family!
Yeah, a job where you're doing better than me!
At this point, the floodgates are open and everything comes out. He explains why it hurt him so much not being the person providing, that if he's not doing that, then he's worthless.
Sue, when I got fired, I lost 2 jobs. Mohican and being head of our house. Well, what am I? And that's why, I guess deep down, in a roundabout way, I was hoping that you'd fail.
This is what she wanted all along, for him to be honest and communicate about what's been eating at him. And so how does she react?
In the book of Job.
You motherfucker!
Ow!
She screams at him for saying something so awful. She wanted him to talk so badly that she never stopped to consider that what he's thinking could be so bad. It would be so easy for them to present either one as the bad guy. Frank for having such terrible feelings towards his wife, or Sue for suddenly being mad at him for doing exactly what she wanted all along. But the great thing about this show is that they rarely present anyone as objectively in the wrong. It's all on the viewer to understand both sides. They devote just as much time to Sue's journey as they do Frank's. It isn't just a case of Sue feeling betrayed at Frank for saying what he says, because, again, they've been building to this all season. You think she'd be happy when he's open, but at the same time, of course she's pissed, who wouldn't be? It helps that we've seen her at her job. We see how much she's belittled and undermined by her peers. So to find out that not even her own husband supports her and wants to see her screw up is horrible. You understand completely where she's coming from, but at the same time, you kinda see why Frank feels the way he does. He's put so much of his value into his work that when he doesn't have a job, he worries that he's not needed anymore. Again, they show you how he gave up everything for his family. The one goal he had in life was to be a pilot, and he made the sacrifice of abandoning that for the sake of raising a kid and getting a job to support them. So that job really was all he had going for him. It's solved in a pretty outlandish way with Frank having a big standoff at the airport, where it's hijacked and he winds up being shot and gives yet another big speech on the news, this time about his wife and how much of an ass he's been the whole time for not supporting her.
The only right decision I ever made was marrying that woman. And I spent the last 2 months throwing it all away.
But given how miserable her marriage has been all season, I don't mind the bit of levity. This is one of those shows where if you're in a bad mood, you should not watch it if you're looking to get your mind off how you're feeling. There is always something bad going on to somebody here. It's always building. But I like that more realistic portrayal of life. It's very similar to BoJack Horseman in that sense, another Netflix cartoon. Although instead of having a focus on mental health, it's about the structure of your average nuclear family and the roles they fill. You can also see there was a slight increase in budget after the first season, or maybe the animators were just getting more used to working with these characters. There are still a couple of moments where it gets a little more creative, and I appreciate those despite how few and far between they are. This season was also thankfully a little funnier too, or maybe the increased episode count to 10 just meant there was more opportunity for me to laugh. But I think my issue with the humor is that they're doing the same jokes you've heard again and again. And sometimes it works, but it's only if the voice acting backs it up. Like, Kevin is probably the funniest character on the show to me other than Frank, but it is 100% down to Justin Long's performance.
Get out, you f***ing freak!
Will you tell everybody we fucked?
I've heard that joke a million times, but the way he says it makes it work. The comedy wouldn't be such a problem, but they commit to it hard. It does that thing where jokes constantly build on each other, where it segues into something else or it can pan over to another group of side characters for a gag, which then immediately leads into a new joke about something else. And while this isn't a big deal in a series like The Simpsons, which has a similar way of formatting its comedy, I don't think it works as well in F is for Family because of how focused everything else is. Like, these neighbor characters do nothing other than Vic. But even then, his storyline is tied to Kevin's while playing music. But the rest are just meant to be dressing, to remind you that there are indeed other people living in this world other than the Murphy family. But they're not all that memorable and rely on the same jokes. Like his fat boss is fat and eats a lot. Groundbreaking stuff. Or his Peter Griffin neighbor is a creep and nobody ever acknowledges it. That doesn't get old. And them being voiced by the same 3 or 4 secondary actors does not help.
How could you?
Didn't eat off him! Yes, you did!
Ah, Christ.
Come on, that's just Jimmy Neutron. Still though, Season 2 is an incredibly strong one. Takes everything great about the first and further expands upon it to give you more insight on Frank and Sue's relationship, with some nice breaks showing how their behavior ends up influencing their kids too. Speaking of kids though, we see Frank and Sue end by talking about how now that the kids are getting older, they can finally start getting back to the lives they put in the back burner. Sure would be a shame if anything were to get in the way of that. Oh, God damn it! Season 3 of F is for Family is really about family. And I think it might be my favorite out of all of them, all because of one man, and his name is Vince Vaughn. It's summertime, but don't you worry. The nice change of scenery doesn't mean things are going to be any less miserable. Right off the bat, we see a wholesome family moment ruined under Sue's realization that she's quit everything she's ever started in life, and this baby is just another roadblock. She feels that her time is running out, and there's nothing she can do to prevent it no matter how hard she tries. Women. Am I right, fellas? This leads her to pursuing a new invention after her previous one was stolen by the company's CEO and became a massive success. But, in her pursuit to find meaning in her life with this new one, she fails to realize that the idea is crap and nobody likes it. The invention is representation for her last ounce of hope, that she can finally do something greater with her life. And she fails. Welp. We also get to meet her parents for the first time, which was cool. You get to see how much they hate Frank and blame him for ruining their daughter's life. Everyone in the show is a piece of shit. It's wonderful. They do a lot more with Bill this season, giving him a new love interest. That being his bully's little sister, Bridget. Can you guess who she's voiced by? That's right, Jimmy Neutron.
Hey, you f***ing cock goblin! Keep talking and I'll chop your dad's dick off and beat you to death with it!
I hate her, she's a bitch, and it only seems to make Bill want her more. That's her only character trait, and she also speaks like a gallon of spit is trying to escape her mouth at all times. It's awful. I don't know why these writers are so incapable of writing for little girls. Okay, yeah, no, that explains it. Kevin also has a bit more to do as well. Him wanting to express his sad feelings more, and because of this, his friends no longer want to be around him, kicking him out of his band. And as a result, he starts hanging out with some older kids he met during his summer school. One of which is just Badger from Breaking Bad. Like literally Badger, same voice, same actor, everything. What is it with all these Breaking Bad connections? Yet again, though, it's Frank who steals the show here. We've seen how he is with his work in Season 1, we've explored his relationship with his wife in Season 2, and now in Season 3, we see him build off a character who's a reflection of himself in a way, befriending a guy who, in Frank's mind, got to live the life he had to leave behind. We're introduced to the new neighbor on the block, Chet, with his wife Win-Win. Chet is a well-respected Air Force pilot. That's like It's like the thing that Frank wanted to be. And because of this, Frank deeply admires him. It gets to the point of being romantic at times. And why wouldn't you like him? He's such a stand-up guy.
Want to take a spin?
If I didn't go to hell for loving a man, I'd kiss you.
He's super kind, helping Frank with all his problems. His wife gives him advice. Hell, he even offers to build an extension onto their house for the new baby. How swell. Frank has spent so much time being miserable about the world around him that it's really sweet seeing him make a genuine friend who shares an interest with him, even getting to the point of being jealous when he starts to bond with their other neighbors. The relationship definitely begins to get to an unhealthy area, however. By episode 3, we see by the end that Frank is so sick and tired of dealing with how unpredictable Sue's mood will be with her pregnancy and all, that he'd rather go to Chet's house immediately after work than his own. It's clear it goes a lot deeper than that too. At the end of the second episode, he helps Frank by giving this big speech about his friend, that he's seen some shit in war, and because of this has completely hardened, but deep down has a lot of issues that are never brought to light. You think this is just for the sake of getting him the pizza like he wanted, but way later in the season we see the exact scenario he described play out but with him instead of Frank, where he's sitting alone at night outside as a cat walks up on the fence in his garden and he sheds a single tear. He's a broken man. You really start to sympathize for the guy. But before getting to that point completely, things start to shift. Over time, Frank begins to get small red flags. Like when they're visiting one of the Air Force places to get wood for the extension, he starts hitting on women despite being with Win-Win, even mentioning Frank being able to get one too. And when he obviously declines this, trying to get Chet to admit it's only a joke, it becomes super awkward.
You know, Sandy has a roommate. Not great looking, but a hell of a moaner.
Kidding, right? I would never do that to Sue.
So I guess I'm a bad guy, huh?
There's also this moment in episode 5 where the characters are all watching a sporting event where it seems like a woman is about to beat a man. And there's so much going on that you might miss it, because not only is Frank desperately seeking Chet's approval among their friends, but Sue is also internalizing the game as a reason for her to keep going with her invention no matter what. But during it, Chet's wife makes a playful jab against him, with him giving her this quick stern look. This later pays off when Sue is returning some food over to the house and overhears him screaming at her for belittling him in front of his peers, heavily implying that this is a common thing. Initially, I was wondering why in a show so obsessed with gross out and extreme topics that they don't shy away from, that they wouldn't go to the limits with this, like showing him hitting her or something. But as you go on, you realize how intentional of a decision this was. Domestic abuse is, for some reason, a pretty common topic in adult animation. The infamous Family Guy episode comes to mind. However, where both of these differ is how the characters react to it, and what we're shown as a viewer. In Screams of Silence, it is exaggerated to the nth degree. She's always got bruises and is timid, slouching around him. They introduce her by having the other characters acknowledge this is a common thing they're all aware of, and nobody seems to really care that much. So when they do try to tackle it seriously, it's laughable. They try to have their cake and eat it too. They want a serious drama and a funny comedy about Peter Griffin. But in F is for Family, it's all about what they don't show. The following episode sees Sue having told Frank about this, and him still trying to give Chet the benefit of the doubt. He doesn't even want to imagine him doing something like this, because Chet in his mind represents the person he wants to be. This would obviously be a lot harder for Frank to defend if he was actually caught hitting her. But because all she witnessed was verbal abuse, he's willing to look past it. I mean, why wouldn't he? He screams at his family all the time. This is then further exemplified later in the day, when Frank actually does witness him physically assault someone out of anger. He still tries to act nice towards him, but makes it clear that he's looking down upon him in this instance. This is where everything shifts. When the family get back from their summer vacation, they see that Chet has built the entire extension by himself. See, what a swell guy. We can just look past that whole abusing his wife thing now, can't we? Well, turns out that immediately after finishing the thing, Chet called up the city council and told them about the Murphys' new unauthorized extension on their house. Meaning Frank is now being tasked with tearing the whole thing down, and for every day he doesn't do it, he's charged the modern day equivalent of $250. Look, I could forgive the whole hitting his wife thing, but this is going too far. You know, at this point, Frank's rose-tilted glasses are off, and he sees Chet for what he really is, vindictive and calculating, even turning all their neighbors against the Murphy family at one point. And even worse, the dickhead just got a job at the same airline as Frank. This really is building up to be the most interesting dynamic on the show. Yeah, not exactly a fan of how abrupt this is. Turns out his wife had been slowly poisoning him over time as revenge for the abuse, and so now he's out of the show. Welp. It really does feel like there was so much untapped potential of this character that had yet to be explored. But because they were reaching the 10 episode limit and usually like keeping each season relatively self-contained, they write him out. It's not all bad. We do have one final moment of Frank and him in the hospital which I enjoy a lot, showing how much of a lost cause the guy truly was. He lets Frank in for a bit and talks about his childhood and the awful stuff he had to endure, then becoming a part of something infinitely more worse once being drafted, talking about how it all made it impossible for him to care about anything. Even in his last moments, he couldn't handle being genuine and sincere for a minute, literally calling Frank a but for just that one short moment, he let Frank in. They then end the season on some big action scene with Bill trying to run away and then almost dying from electrocution, but I didn't really care for that stuff as much. Because the stuff with the kids is more often than not a reflection of how they're being treated by their parents, I end up finding the parents infinitely more interesting to talk about. Like the scene between Kevin and Frank where he finally talks about his own father and how horribly abusive he was, showing you why Frank is the way he is. That because it's how he was raised, it's the only way he knows how to treat his own kid. It's cyclical. But by the finale, Frank and Sue apologize to the kids for not spending enough time with them. That they got so carried away with pursuing their own dreams that they forgot they're a family. Aww. And so with that, things seem to finally be going back to normal for the Murphy family.
Evidently, your grandfather is gonna be staying with us.
The hell he is!
I seriously do love how each season of this show gives Frank someone primarily for him to work off of, which highlights a different aspect of who he is as a person. This time it's his father and unboxing that traumatic past. His dad's come to town, being the first time Frank has seen him in around 18 years or so.
They lost my bag. My meal tasted like an ashtray. No matter what you do, kids, never fly Mohican.
Recognize that voice anywhere? Yep, that's right. It's Mike from Better Call Saul.
Put your dick away, Walter.
Frank is naturally very pissed off about this, but not for the reason you might think. It's not because of how awful his dad is, it's in fact because he seems completely different now. He's nice. This eats away at him. He's waiting for that moment where the act is broken, and everybody can finally see him for how Frank did as a kid. You know, an asshole. They do a great job at showing how his dad acts to the public versus behind closed doors, being a very respected figure in the town and then taking out all his rage on his family. And in Frank's pursuit of trying to get him to drop the act, he realizes that everything he's mad at his father for doing is the exact same way he acts towards his own kids. Upon rewatching this season, I was shocked to remember that we barely get to see Frank interact with his dad, despite that being the whole focus. Instead, it's mainly to show how, in his attempt to receive some kind of apology, he's ignoring his own family. But you can understand his frustrations because he has nobody he can talk to about this. Everybody thinks Frank is the asshole for the way he treats his father, because they only got to see him for how he was to the public. Things aren't going well for the other family members either. Well, other than Bill, he's content. Ironically enough, because he's completely given up on having any kind of morality, and is a straight-up asshole to everyone.
I told you not to come, and then you made a big deal about it, and you still didn't come. It was better when you weren't pretending to try.
Maureen also befriends Bridget after a while, realizing they have a lot in common. They try to make you sympathize for her by giving her a sad, dead mother backstory, but do nothing else to make you like her. She's still a massive bitch. Once again, I think Maureen is definitely the weakest aspect of this show. They do next to nothing with her. Same with Kevin this season. He gets a girlfriend, which is sweet, but it's mainly paired up with the Vic arc yet again, where he realizes he's getting older and there's not much he can do to fight it, placing all of his hopes onto Kevin's career, which obviously fails. It's no surprise that yet again Frank and Sue are the stars of the show. One of the best moments with her coming from this season. She gets a call from her old boss asking to meet her at a restaurant. She's ecstatic at first, as she thinks she's going to be offered her old job back, but then realizes it was merely to have a baby shower, which depresses her. This is the moment where you can see she's given up. She finally understands that there's not much else she can do with her life, or at least not follow the exact dream she wanted, and outwardly expresses how much she doesn't want to have her baby. Fun times. As the season continues, however, we see that the standout character is none other than Bill. Not that Bill, but like Frank's dad's name is also Bill, so... My name is Walter Hartwell. Little Bill starts hanging around Big Bill more, almost seeing him as his parental figure. But when put back in the exact same element of keeping up a solid public image, his grandfather winds up slipping back into the same attitude he had towards Frank, this time towards his grandson. And he does it in front of everybody too. It's super awkward. He fucking threatens to hit him.
It was an accident letting you out of the house without a leash. Pick him up before I put you down that fucking well.
This is when Bill realizes that maybe he did treat Frank poorly when he was a kid, and at that point they're able to somewhat bond, even if it isn't Little Wes. He gives his son the most minor words of encouragement, but it's evident that it means the world to him.
I always thought it was a good hook.
Really?
Yeah, one of the best I've seen. Fluid, natural motion.
And even jokingly gives Frank the first bit of physical bonding he's received from the fella. This then immediately carries over to showing Frank hugging all of his children. He knows how much that meant to him, and because of that, realizes how important it is for him to do the same for his kids. Frank's childhood trauma has vanished and everything is right with the world. Except of course not. If you were expecting a happy ending, then you're sorely mistaken. If you want that, then go back to watching frickin' Peppa Pig or Bluey, you absolute baby. Sue doesn't accept this. Similarly to Season 2, she's been begging for Frank to forgive his father this entire time, and when he finally does, she can't understand it, and tries to put Frank in his place, telling him that one hug doesn't fix decades of neglect and torment, and that he's simply using that to cope and find an easy way out of it. That nothing was actually solved here between the two of them, which Frank obviously scoffs at the idea of.
Deep down inside, I guess I just needed an attaboy.
I've been telling you that for 6 weeks.
It seems pretty unreasonable at first, again because this is what she wanted. But the more she explains, the more you start to understand her side, that she's put at the brunt of his rage all the time, and so when he eventually realizes that he isn't as fixed as he thought he was, it's going to be an even worse blowout than usual, and she's going to have to be the person to pick up the pieces. And so understandably, she wants her husband to keep his expectations in check, which of course he doesn't, and ends up paying the ultimate price for. We'll later see the family watching Marine School play, where Frank tells his dad he can drop the act and admit how shitty he was to him when he was a kid. But he still denies it, because he truly doesn't believe he did anything worth apologizing for. And with everything having built up for so long, he finally stands up to his father and strikes him in the face. Obviously, this is justice being served, but to everyone else present for this, they just saw this guy punch an elderly man in the face. They had no idea how deserved this was, and because of that, Frank is, once again, seen as the bad guy. I swear to God, he can never catch a fucking break. At this point, Frank leaves for some work retreat knowing his wife could go into labor any day now, because he can't stand to face everyone's judgments. This is only notable because the airline rival is voiced by Joe Pera, who gives a good performance. But this is where the season kinda runs out of steam in my opinion. It's the same issue as last time, where it feels like they've just hit a brick wall. They know they're at episode 10, and so they need to wrap everything up as quickly as possible. And so Sue goes into labor, Frank rushes back to be there for the delivery, almost getting involved in an action-packed plane crash. But most importantly, Bill comes to realize how badly he messed up with his son, that he really wasn't the great father he thought of himself as. To him, the role of a man is to put food on the table. And so in his eyes, he did exactly what he was meant to do. Sound familiar?
I raised him the best I knew for the times. Was I perfect? No.
That's why Frank is the way he is, because the only person he could look up to showed him no love, and that's the example he tried to lead to his own kids. I'm not personally a massive fan of how quickly Bill has this turnaround. We go from him wanting to bash Frank's head in, to that scene I just showed you not coming long after. So, for such a headstrong character, it would have made sense for us to, you know, see his turnaround, but that's a minor nitpick in the grand scheme of things. Bill finally, after all these years, apologizes to his son, promising to be better. But there'll be time for that later, he's got a birth to witness. So yeah, the baby is born, hallelujah. Everything is right with the world, bam! Dead dad.
Dad? Dad! Dad!
Yes, that is how they end the season. I mean, are you really that surprised? I both love and hate this ending. Love it because it shows that Frank never truly got the closure he so desperately sought after, that he was so close to getting what he always wanted, and much like everything else in his life, it was stripped from him at the last second. Fits in line with how everything else in the universe is set on beating the man down. Dead dad? Of course, throw it in the pile. But I mostly hate it for how it was executed. It's too abrupt. And that partially is just to leave it on a cliffhanger for the next season, I'm aware, but at the same time, like, come on, there was no signs of him being close to death's door until this point. In my eyes, it should have been something they built up to throughout the final couple episodes. They don't need to focus on it too much or have the guy spit blood or cough or whatever, but even one hint that things weren't okay with this would help. Then, during the scene where his dad is trying to apologize, have it made clear to Frank that his father isn't doing okay, and this may be his last moments on Earth. And because of that, he has an extremely hard choice to make. Be with his dad as he passes away, or be with his family to witness his baby being born. It's like a life and death kind of thing, like a yin and the yang, you know what I'm saying? Still though, that ends what I would consider my second favorite season. There's a lot of stuff I feel to mention, like this one contains the only episode of the entire show to focus on a character other than the Murphys, with one of Frank's airport friends, Rosie, becoming the city alderman, and I'm sorry, I just don't care. Rosie is definitely up there with Vic as being one of the better secondary characters because he's actually a character, but I can't help but feel like I wished they used that for more of the stuff with Frank and his dad because it really needed at least one more episode. Despite the rushed ending, though, Season 4 further focuses on the strengths of the series, that being exploring Frank's character using other people in his life as excuses to delve into certain aspects of his personality, this time being why he is the way he is, and I think they handled it all super well, ending aside. It does beg the question, though, where can they go from here? We only have one season left, and it's the second shortest at only 8 episodes. Is this going to be a case where the show is incredibly strong throughout, only to leave us on a lackluster conclusion? Yeah, kinda. Okay, it's not that bad. I actually think the ending works perfectly for what the show has been set up as. I just can't help but feel like it was left a little open-ended in the hopes of them potentially getting a 6th season, which of course didn't happen. But I also think that works in its favor, you know, given all the themes the series has explored throughout its run. We pick up right where things have left off. Frank's dad has just passed away and we're at the funeral. But Frank is acting very differently to how he was at the end of his dad's life, seeming like he doesn't really care all that much, and just wants it to be over and done with so he can move on. Actively getting annoyed when people come up to him and talk about what a great guy his dad was. Things continue to get worse when he tries to leave his job after the company was bought out by the rival airport, but it turns out that because he was fired back in Season 1, they don't consider him an employee for his 15 years of service, only the past 6 months, which obviously is going to heavily deduct his leaving check. And right when he tries to have a more positive mood and not care about this junk, he's thrown for a loop again when he finds a key to a box that his dad had told him about before he died. And so now he's got to decide whether or not to move on from all this, or continue to search for an answer that may not even exist. He chooses the latter. Really, you get the vibe from this whole entire season that they're trying to figure out a way to give you some sort of conclusion for these characters. Sue once again meets with her parents, this time to try and reconnect their family, mainly her estranged brother Louis, who was banished from the family for being gay. She doesn't want things to end the same way it did for Frank and his father. They end by giving her somewhat of a natural outlet to give her more purpose, opening up a baby daycare in town that trains young parents on how to handle raising a kid. In one way it's nice because it allows her to put her skills to use and feel important, but also maybe not all that great because she really is just boiled down to being able to raise kids well. That's all she can do. But still, I appreciate the effort. It's a nice ending. Given how they're nowhere near as important as Frank and Sue, it also made sense for them to compile all the kids' final arcs into a single episode as well. At this point in the series, Maureen has gone down the path of Satanism, Bill is a junior cop, and Kevin is sulking over being dumped by his girlfriend, and so their parents send all of them off for the dead to handle their issues. I love what they do with it here. Frank is told point blank that only he is responsible for how his kids are, that he has to stop looking for someone to blame. Bill even gets to explain to him how he saw them having sex back in the first season.
No! Oh, Jesus Christ! No!
And it ends with one of my favorite conclusions to any episode in the series. With them having exhausted every other option, they try the simple approach of being attentive to their kids. You know, actually being a family and doing stuff together. They realize that quality time is the key. That their kids aren't screwed up, they're just having different experiences in life. Some good, some bad. And it's how they react to and deal with their children, which will shape how they turn out. He learns that instead of chasing after some cryptic message from his dad, Frank should enjoy what he still has in his life, the one thing he does have control over. Damn, it's bizarre this is only episode 6 out of 8. This is like the perfect finale to the show. What else is there?
Oh my god.
Of course. So Frank finds the box his dad was talking about and it's full of cassette tapes, and so he completely reverts, isolating himself from his family to try and find out what his dad was trying to tell him. But there's nothing. He stops keeping up the positive act, and very much so returns back to a version of himself akin to Season 1, believing the answer is in his work, that being good at his job is the key to a happy life. This leads into the finale, which honestly I think is pretty underwhelming. Frank won't get his Christmas bonus unless he comes up with a groundbreaking idea for the airport, and so wants this evil Knievel guy to jump one of their planes, and most of the final episode is spent watching that disaster unfold, along with a Rosie Alderman subplot, which, again, don't really care about. Much like everything else in his life, the plan fails. The guy makes the jump, but proceeds to call out the entire town for how self-seeking they are, especially Frank. And because of this, he gets demoted and his pay is cut in half. I mean, at least it's consistently depressing. He of course takes this out in his family, blowing up at them on Christmas, and ends up leaving to drink his sorrows away at a bar, where he's informed that there was never any meaning behind the box. He misinterpreted what his dad has been talking about, and he put himself in this miserable position for no reason, because he, yet again, put all of his self-worth into his work.
It wasn't all bad. He just didn't know how to be a dad.
How fucking hard is it to not be an asshole to your own kid?
Well, you're here drinking on Christmas, so you tell me.
This is when he finally comes to understand the ultimate message of the entire series, that he can't control his life. There's always going to be a variable he couldn't account for, but what he can control is how he reacts. Because he had a kid before he really had himself figured out, he spent their entire childhoods repeating the same patterns his own father had towards him, not understanding that his kids have now been building up the exact same kind of resentments towards him.
I found out what Box 16 means.
Really?
It means my parents were two messed up people who fucked and made me. And nothing more.
At this point, he comes home and apologizes, the ending entirely paralleling the intro to episode 1, the family all sitting at the table where Frank is interrupted by the phone ringing. But this time, he doesn't answer. He's gonna continue doing what's important to him, and that's spending time with his family.
What if they're calling from work? It might be important.
Nah, this is important.
I'm not gonna act like F is for Family is some sort of groundbreaking show, that it's one of the all-time classic cartoons that everybody has to watch. Again, a lot of it I heavily dislike, such as the animation and especially the humor, but I think there's more than enough good here. Where the show really shines is how genuinely it portrays a natural family dynamic, and how screwed up it can be, but approaches it from all angles to make you understand that nobody is a good or bad guy, they're just people trying to figure themselves out. And that's what I love about it. Its commentary or messages aren't even that deep. It's not a BoJack, where there needs to be in-depth discussions about every single episode talking about what every little line represents, and means in the grand scheme of things. But I like how simple it is. It's a nice, refreshing change of pace to see a cartoon in this day and age that just tries to be completely genuine. There's no snark, no meta commentary where the characters wink and nudge at the camera. You can tell that Bill Burr and the other writers just really wanted to tell a story about their childhoods, trying to understand why their parents were the way they were. And I think that's really special. It sucks that, despite all the positive reviews, many people weren't able to look past the art style and give it a chance. And I get it, a cartoon's appearance is such a large factor. It's the first thing you see. But F is for Family is definitely one of those rare cases, where I hope some of you are able to look past the bad, and see that what's really here is a genuinely amazing show, and one which I hope was able to garner more attention over time. Okay, but for real, that H3 podcast interview was abysmal.